Okay, should be working. Okay, so we are moving as planned to chapter 3 today. It covers the concepts of demand and substitutes. We say this is a theory of demand, and it is rather thorough theory of demand. So we're going to learn, among other things, what is the difference between demand and need. Demand is not the same thing as need. We're going to learn about what is marginal utility. That's one of the key concepts that I will introduce in a formal fashion today. And relationship between marginal utility and demand. So you're not gonna go ahead.
I can't see because of the piano.
You cannot see. Can I move the piano? Huh. Let me try this way. Can you see now, everybody?
I can see.
Can you move, because it's not so easy for me to reposition the camera. So because I have to record this for people who are away. Can you please just can you move somewhere closer to so you can see it? Sorry about this. Okay. Can everybody see now? Okay. So the theory of demand, we're going to learn what is the relationship, what is marginal utility, and what is the relationship between marginal utility and demand. We're not going to be talking about the concept of supply this time around. Next time we're going to define supply, and then we will have one chapter that talks about the coordination between the supply and demand. That's eventually how market prices are determined. So we have a theory of demand, theory of supply, and then the process of equilibration or coordination of supply and demand. The market prices, I can anticipate as much to say that prices are actually points where supply and demand are where they intersect. Then we'll see what is the difference between demand versus quantity demanded, QD. Which factors can influence demand to change? Change in demand. And finally, we'll introduce the concept that is necessary for the analysis of competition and monopoly and consumer behavior. That's the concept of elasticity of demand. So these are the key terms, these are the key concepts for today. So let's start first with the first one, demand versus need. So we've already determined a couple of things, that human needs and human wishes, human wants, elasticity of demand is the last one. This is change in demand. Which factors contribute to the change in demand? We've seen already that human preferences determine the value of economic goods. You can say that human needs and human wants is what determines the economic value. Now, we very often confuse in our everyday speech concepts of demand and need, and they're different. Need is an abstract category. Say, I need a glass of water now, or I need a Ferrari, I need this or I need that. But that's not an economic category. Need is not an economic category. Why? Because whatever we want to achieve, we always have to balance it against other conflicting goals that we have. So if satisfaction of a certain need conflicts with the satisfaction of another need that we may consider to be more important at a given point in time, that need will go unsatisfied. So need, in that sense, is a psychological category. I may wish something, I may daydream about something, but need is never demonstrated in action. You really prove that you really need something once you do something about satisfying it. Because in most situations, whatever you want to achieve conflicts in achieving something else. That stems from the fact of scarcity. Scarcity of our resources, scarcity of our time, scarcity of everything that we deal with in our everyday life. So we have all the time to balance which needs are we going to satisfy and to what extent. The concept of demand is a more precise theoretical concept because it takes into account scarcity. Demand is a need that accounts for scarcity. Demand can be demonstrated in action. Demand is when I buy a bottle of whiskey, then I have a demand for whiskey. If I wish I had a bottle of whiskey but decide against purchasing it, that's not demand. An abstract need that nobody can know anything about. And we know that in economics we want to operate, to use the concepts that could be demonstrated in action. We are not interested in subjective psychological states of mind, because that's what psychology does. We want concepts that could be demonstrated in practical action. So demand always involves sacrifices. Demand always means that you have to choose something over something else. And it also means that you have to decide about how much of a certain need to satisfy. That's the second key point. That economic satisfaction, utility maximization, is incremental. Utility maximization is incremental. That means two things. First, or has two aspects, rather. We never satisfy all our needs 100%. Why? Because we always have to balance satisfaction of other competing needs. And how this works in practice is actually that we increase or decrease our expenditure of resources and time and energy on satisfaction of given needs in time. We always try to achieve an equilibrium, the maximum total level of utility for ourselves by satisfying competing needs to various degrees. One example, you could probably achieve much better results in college if you studied 16 hours per day for classes. But the problem is that your need to get good grades and to finish college quickly is not the only goal that you have in life. It's not the only need that you have to satisfy by having 24 hours per day or 16 hours of training life every day. So that you're not going to categorically satisfy your need to maximize your grades and success in college, you're going to balance it against other needs that compete with the need to have good grades, compete for your time, your energy, and your attention. So you're not going to study 16 hours, you're going to study less than that, 12, 8, 5 hours. Maybe some days you're not going to read anything, maybe during the exam periods you're going to study 10, 12 hours, who knows, sometimes you may not sleep overnight, and so on. But you have other competing goals that you want to achieve all the time, and you have to allocate your relatively limited scarce resources in order to achieve some of all of these goals at the same time. That's what you do in optimization. How to allocate the scarce goods that we have to satisfy different kinds of needs that we have to a different degree. So that's the basic concept of stability maximization. And then what is demand? Demand is what we can observe by looking at your behavior. You bought 2 bottles of scotch. You bought how many loaves of bread. You bought this or that. All of these decisions were made because you have a limited amount of money per month, and you have to decide how to allocate this limited amount of money for competing needs. You're not going to buy 24 bottles of scotch or 240 bottles of scotch and nothing else. Proper, mostly amount. And then we say your demand for scotch is such and such, your demand for bread is such and such, your demand for books is such and such. Whereas your need might be infinitely higher than that, but unfortunately you cannot satisfy them all at the same time. Okay, so this is the basic concept of demand versus need, and incremental satisfaction. It's a little bit more, a little bit less. If your preferences change for whatever reason, what you're going to do? For example, you realize that your grades are not where you want them to be, so then you incrementally increase maybe from 6 hours to 7 hours or 8 hours per day study. You decrease the expenditure of your time on other things that you would have done. But it's never categorical, like from 0 hours to 24 hours. It's always incremental. So this principle that all our decisions are done incrementally with small additions or subtractions is called marginal analysis, decisions on the margin, on the edge. You increase or decrease something slightly. Marginal decision making or marginal utility. So now marginal utility means utility that you derive, that any person derives from having one more unit of something available to them. The level of satisfaction of utility that we derive by having one more unit of some good at our disposal. Now, what can we say about marginal utility in general? It can help us understand and describe many things in economics. One of them is, you can call this a law of marginal utility. It says, as you increase the stock of goods at your disposal, stock of any good, material good or non-material good, its marginal utility decreases. Whatever that might be, bottles of scotch, sacks of corn, computers, cars. Any useful economic good that you acquire, that you increase the available stock of that good, the marginal utility, the utility satisfaction that you derive from having one additional unit declines. So marginal utility is declining when you increase the stock of good. It is increasing when you decrease the stock of good, the stock of goods. Could be increasing or decreasing depending on what you do. Why is marginal utility declining or decreasing as you keep stockpiling that good? There are two ways in which you can think about it. As the first explanation for why marginal utility is declining is, imagine that you have one good, that all units of a given good are equally serviceable, which means that they are equal, could be equally used for many different purposes. And they're the same. Let's say one example that economists sometimes use, the sacks of corn, equally big sacks of equally high quality corn. Now, you have 0 of them. Then you acquire the first one. And let's say that you have 5 different needs, or 5 different utilizations for corn. Let's say you're Robinson Crusoe on a desert island. You know who Robinson Crusoe is? Have you read this book? The guy who undergoes a shipwreck and he finds himself alone completely on a desert island and has to survive. So Robinson Crusoe, so he needs corn or wheat first for food. Let's say that's the most important. That's the most important need that he could have sacrificed with corn to bake bread. Then the second most important need is for, let's say, for seeds to plant corn for the next harvest, for next year. Let's say then the third is to feed, if you find some animals, or let's say imagine he has chicken or something like that, to feed animals, to supplement his diet by some protein. Feeding animals. So all these are in descending order. The first one is the most important need that he has, that he can satisfy by using a sack of corn. Preserving it for seeds to plant next week is the next year is the second most important one. Feeding animals is the third one. If he had the fourth sack, he would have tried to make some whiskey. I would say my father would consider this value scale anyway. Whiskey is rather low. So the fourth most important utilization is to make whiskey. And let's say if he had 5 units of corn, he would have used it for feeding birds, just for fun. Okay, so imagine now that he had 0 sacks and he finds one. For which purpose among these 5 he is most likely to use that sack of corn? What do you think? He had 0 and he finds one. Food. Yeah, food. Why? Why food? Yeah, his rational utility maximization. That means that you satisfy your most pressing needs first. Okay, so that's the marginal utility of the first unit, of the first sack of corn, corresponds to the satisfaction that he derives from consuming it for food, for bread. Let's say he finds the second one. What is next to be satisfied? The second need. Now, what can you tell me? Which of the two has a higher marginal utility? The first or the second? Which is more useful? Yeah, the first. Why? Why? Because it serves to satisfy the more important need. So see, it's a rational utility maximizer. He will satisfy the most pressing need first, and then, as he acquires more and more of a good, he will be using them to satisfy less and less important needs. So then the value of every additional unit of a useful good that he acquires will be lower than the value of the previous one. Okay, so that's what it means to say that marginal utility is declining as you increase the stock of your goods. Every additional unit is used to satisfy less and less important needs. Okay, let's say it was the other way around. We had 5 sacks of corn stockpiled somewhere in a store. And something happens like the mice or rats eat corn, and he is now left with 4 of them. Which need is going to be sacrificed first? So he was satisfying all 5 of them. Now he loses 1 unit. Which need is going to go on the chopping block first?
Feeding birds.
Yeah, feeding birds, the least important one. So when you increase your satisfaction, you try first to satisfy the most important need. When you sacrifice stuff, you try always to sacrifice the least important satisfaction. So you see then, when you lose, when you decrease the available stocking of a certain economic good that is at your disposal, the marginal utility of the first one that you give up will be the lowest, because you will sacrifice the least important need if you lose it or give it away. Then if he loses the second unit, what is now going to be sacrificed? Making this is the second least important need that he has on his value scale. So now the marginal utility of the second lost unit will be higher than the marginal utility of the first lost unit. Okay? So that's what we mean that marginal utility is increasing as you give up units of a good. And it is declining as you increase the stock of the good in question. In the first case, you satisfy less and less important needs as you increase the stock of the good. In the second case, you sacrifice more and more important needs as you give up unit after unit of a given good. There is another way of thinking about this to demonstrate why marginal utility is always declining in acquisition and increasing in giving up. When you think about sacrificing competition for your limited resources, let's say that you're consuming different kinds of goods at the same time, and you want to increase, your income hasn't changed, but you want to increase your possession of let's say, orange. So what do you need to do in order to achieve this? Obviously, if your real income hasn't changed, you have to sacrifice, you have to reduce your consumption of something else. So what are you going to sacrifice first? Again, we are going to sacrifice the other commodities or other products or other consumer articles that you value the least, whatever that can be. And then, if you want to keep stockpiling oranges, you will have them to keep sacrificing more and more important products serving to satisfy more and more important needs along the way. So it's the same principle, whether you're talking about one good satisfying multiple needs or multiple goods, the principle is always the same. Marginal utility declines when you increase the stock of the good, marginal utility of that particular thing, and it is increasing as you decrease the available stock. Now, why is this important? Two things. Why marginal utility is a crucial concept. It is a crucial concept because it helped us solve, it helped us develop price theory. The way how the market mechanism works, and the way how market prices works was not understood before the concept of marginal utility was invented. So there was one paradox. It's called in economic theory diamond water paradox. It says water has a much greater use value. It's much more useful to us than diamonds. And yet, diamonds are much more valuable. Diamonds have a much higher economic value for us. Nobody would pay a cent for a gallon of water, and diamonds are extremely expensive. How could this be? What's the reason for that? And then the answer that marginal utility provides is that what determines the value, the exchange value, the market value, the price of a good, is not the total utility of the entire stock of goods. What determines the price is marginal utility, is the utility of a relevant unit of consumption. So in our particular case, a relevant unit of diamonds, one diamond, as compared to our need for it, is so much scarcer than the relevant unit of water as compared to its total available quantity. So marginal utility of water is pretty much zero. Why? Because how many gallons of water that you consume that is still more than enough out there. Whereas with diamonds, that's not the case. One diamond more for me is one diamond less for you, and if there are 24 diamonds around, then that's a pretty big hit to the utility of everyone involved. So people have to pay up the price of diamonds astronomically in order to get 1 unit of diamonds. So essentially, how much people are ready to pay for something that depends on its marginal utility. The utility of one given unit, additional unit of value. And how large this marginal utility will be, the utility of one additional unit of consumption. That is determined by the relationship between our needs and the available stock of that good. So one example would be water in temperate climate is pretty much free. Why? Because the relationship between the relevant unit of our consumption, whatever that is, 1 liter or 1 gallon, and the available total stock of water is such that marginal utility is essentially zero. However, in Sahara Desert, marginal utility increases dramatically. The available quantity, available stock is so small that our unit consumption becomes very, very high. But we can say that marginal utility determines value of economic goods. Yeah, any questions as well? So just bear in mind this concept of marginal decision making means that all economic decision making and pretty much all decision making in life is almost always marginal. It's rarely categorical. All or nothing. It's always a little bit more of that in order to achieve a little bit less of this. Okay, so now what is the relationship between marginal utility as described and the concept of demand? So we can think of it in the following way. We can plot like this. So we are talking about the two magnitudes pertaining to any given product. The quantity available stock at your disposal, on the one hand, and its value or price. The relationship between these two is something that interests us. And how can we, what I told you about Robinson Crusoe and sacks of corn, is there any way to graphically represent this? The way is very simple, actually. You have this mathematical, simple coordinating system, Cartesian. On the vertical axis, you have a price or value. On the horizontal axis, you have the quantity of a given good. This is 0. Let's say that we have the first unit. Quantity is 1. And now let's say we arbitrarily assign certain value, certain marginal utility, certain price to that thing. Imagine now that we're not talking about Robinson Crusoe, but about yourself. You are buying a certain quantity of a given good. And let's say the price for the first unit that you are gonna pay will be here. Let's say price 1. $15. So now imagine that you want to keep increasing your purchases of these goods, that you're not satisfied with buying just one. So what's going to happen when you buy the second one? Well, the marginal utility of the second unit is less than the first one. So the maximum price that you would be willing to pay for the second unit is lower than for the first unit. And for the third unit, all the same. And so on down the line. So, as you keep stockpiling the good, actually, you would be ready to pay less and less for every additional unit. That's the principle of marginal utility, just plain and simple graphical shown. You know what is, if you imagine now for a moment, all these points, all these possible combinations of quantities that you acquired and prices that you were ready to pay for them, what is it called? If you imagine for a moment that we connect all of these dots with one line. Any idea? What's this called? This mathematical function here.
Inverse.
Yeah, the relationship, that's a good observation. The relationship between the price and quantity, between the value and quantity is inverse, of course. Higher the quantity available to you, lower marginal, lower the value, lower the price. Yeah, that's a good observation. But the curve itself is called the demand curve. That's demand for you. That's the first law of demand. Demand curve. We can call it here the marginal benefit curve. If we analyze the demand curve in this way, why demand curve is the marginal benefit curve? Can anyone guess? Because it shows actually what we gain, what we achieve, how much we benefit from every additional unit of goods. You see that the marginal benefit is declining as we increase the stock of our goods. Marginal benefit is the greater here in the first unit. That's why we are ready to pay the most for it. And as we keep increasing our possession of the good, marginal benefits decline, and our maximum buying price that we are ready to pay goes down as well. So this is the demand curve. So this is maybe the analytically most precise way to define demand. It's a curve showing the declining marginal benefits from acquisition of a good. There is another way in which we can read the demand curve and think about it. If you imagine for a moment that this is a demand curve for the entire society. We are talking about your individual demand. Let's say that we're talking now about the entire society. The demand curve shows the inverse relationship between the price and quantity demanded. Quantity demanded is quantity that people will buy at a given price. This relationship is inverse. Higher the price, lower the quantity demanded. As prices increase, people will buy less. So that's called the first law, sometimes fundamental first law of demand. There is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demand. What's going to happen if your demand increases? Now, another distinction that we have to bear in mind now, the difference between demand as such and quantity demand. So demand is not the same as the quantity demand. The main difference is that quantity demanded changes only as a function of price. Definition of quantity demanded. Higher the price, lower the quantity demanded. And vice versa. Lower the price, higher the quantity. We can say graphically that the changes in quantity demanded are shown as a movement or a slide along the given demand curve. So see, if the change in quantity demanded is determined by change in price, then let's say you had a price 1, quantity demanded 1. Now quantity demanded, if it changes to 3, the price will change to 3. So you will have a shift along the demand curve, along a given demand curve. So what we assume that all other factors, our income, our preferences, the number of consumers in a given society, the percentage of income that is expended for this particular purpose are all fixed. And the only thing that changes is prices. If that's the case, then quantity demanded will change as a function of prices, of a change in a given price, graphically shown as a slide along the demand curve. So quantity demanded is a function of prices. Demand is a function of a couple of other things. When we say that the demand increases, demand for something, demand for bread, demand for oil, increases or decreases. We are not talking anymore about the slide along a given demand curve. We are talking about the wholesale shift or movement of the demand curve, right or left. Okay? So if the demand for oil increases, the entire curve will shift to the right. If demand decreases, the entire curve will shift back to the left. So what is the meaning of the demand? Shift in demand. The meaning of the shift in the demand is that if the demand for a given good increases, that means that at any given price level, people will be buying more than before. See, at any given price, people will be buying more. Because the entire curve shifted to the right. And vice versa. A decrease in demand means that at any given potential price, people will be buying less. Okay, so you get this difference between quantity demanded is something that we observe, changes in the quantity demanded, and the changes that are dependent only on the change in prices, and are shown as a slide along the demand curve. Change in demand is dictated by other things rather than prices. We'll see in a moment which are the factors that can influence the change in demand, and are represented as a shift left or right on the whole demand curve. So see, this was the first quantity demanded, the old demand curve. Now the new demand curve, you have new quantity demanded here, increased. And for every price point, you have the same increase in the stock of goods that people will buy. Now, any ideas? What may influence the change in demand? Which factors could influence? Demand for any given consumer good.
Natural disasters.
Yeah, natural disasters. How do the natural disasters can influence demand?
So like if a hurricane or something hits an area, there's going to be demand like water, toilet paper, stuff like that, or
Okay.
coronavirus,
So that's one possibility. There's more demand for toilet paper and water. Will there be less demand for something else? Maybe for cars or for flat screen TVs. Why is that? Why will the demand for toilet paper and water increase, and demand for cars and flat screen TVs will decrease in disaster hit area? There's two different reasons for this. Two different reasons for each one of these. So what changed? What influenced the demand for the changes in demand for toilet paper and water?
People who've been told to stay home when they want to have to go get toilet paper, so they're just stuck at home.
So their preferences change. No, they want to buy more. They need actually more toilet paper and more water. So why? Because short term. What about cars and flat screen TVs? Maybe, and particularly hard to hit areas, this might be the case. If people lose their houses or their property in an area, their income decreases, their demand for food can be high. So the first type of reasons that may influence demand are changes in human preferences. For whatever reason, people start buying more. Consumer manias for new products. Something becomes popular and everybody is buying. So that means at any given price, whatever the price, people will be buying more of it than before. So the first reason is changing preferences. What's going to happen to the demand for bread in America if we get 2 million new immigrants overnight? It will increase, obviously. So the number of consumers, the size of population, demographic shifts, population changes, and the number of consumers in a given area. Even in the absence of any change in preference, people want to buy the same. Every single individual wants to buy the same quantity of bread as before. But if you have more people, you will have the higher total demand for bread. Total amount of money that people will be expending on bread will be higher. It will shift the demand curve to the right. There's another thing. What's going to happen to the demand for margarine if the price of butter increases dramatically? What do you think? Or what's going to happen to the demand for orange juice if the price of apple juice increases dramatically?
There's an increase because it's a substitute for.
Yeah. So the prices of substitutes and complements. Prices of substitutes and complements. For some reason, they didn't include complements in your book. So what are substitutes? Substitutes are goods that could be used to satisfy the same consumer needs. Complements are goods that are always consumed in tandem, together, bread and butter. Golf clubs and golf balls, and so on. So how the prices of substitutes influence the demand for their substitutes? Higher the price of one substitute, the demand for the other one will increase. The price of margarine goes up, the demand for butter increases, of course. Complements, it decreases, obviously. Price of golf balls increases, then the demand for golf balls decreases. We know that it was low demand, higher the price, lower the demand. But then, since golf clubs are consumed always in tandem with golf balls, the demand for golf clubs will go down as well. So price of complements depress the demand for complementary goods, whereas the prices of substitutes, increasing prices of substitutes, increase the demand for the substitutes. So that's another pretty important, pretty big factor. So that's one of the key competitive mechanisms. That's by the way, that's why it's very difficult in a market economy to achieve and maintain a monopolistic position. So as a monopolist, what you want to do, you want to charge as high a price for your product. And theoretically, if your product was irreplaceable, if it were not substitutable by anything else, you would have extracted gigantic profits by charging extra ordinary high prices. But the reason why most entrepreneurs cannot charge very high prices is that there are substitutes for almost everything. Consumers will shift to something else. I like orange juice very much. But if the prices of orange juice much more than apple juice, so if the prices of orange juice increase 2 times, I would think twice before buying. For most people, that's the case, more or less. What else? How changes in income can affect demand. Real income, I don't mean here like in monetary income. Control for inflation. Purchasing power, how many goods you can buy. How can this real income influence the demand, changes in demand? What is the first? I have the first thought pops up. The default position should be that as your income increases, the demand should increase as well. You have more money or have higher income, you're going to buy more stuff. In some cases, this increase will be small, in some cases it will be larger, but at any rate, the expectation is that the most goods, in the case of most goods, demand for them will increase when the income of the population increases. However, that's not always the case. So most goods are called normal goods. Normal goods are goods, the demand for which increases as a function of a given increase in income. Your income goes up, you want to buy more. But there are some goods that are sometimes called given goods or inferior goods, in which it's the opposite. As your income increases, your consumption of that good goes down. Can you think of any example of that? Of those kinds of goods? It's kind of counterintuitive.
Like ramen noodles.
Okay, why?
Because as you get more money, you can afford like nicer food.
Yeah, that's good. So bad food, fast food in some cases. Second-hand cars. Consumption, demand for second-hand cars decreases as your income goes up. So these are so-called inferior goods that people consume more, and they have a lower income, and then when they're higher and their income increases, they reduce the consumption of these goods because they switch to better substitutes. Expectations about the movement of future prices influence your decisions to buy or not to buy today. Now, your example of toilet, actually the example of toilet paper is very good. Toilet paper and COVID-19 epidemics. You remember March this year? You couldn't find toilet paper anywhere for weeks, maybe for months. Why is that? What was the reason for that? Apart from wiping the sandwich, 90% of people, but that's a psychological explanation. We need an economic explanation. Why were people buying so much?
They're locked in the house and they're locked inside.
Yeah. So they anticipated they're not going to be able to move outside, and they were afraid that the price will increase. How do people buy? So if people expect the price of something to go up in the future, they will buy more now. That's a speculative. We call that the speculative demand or speculative change. People speculate, expect. There's some kind of pejorative undertone to the term speculative, but there shouldn't be. There's expectations that people have. If people expect the prices of something to increase in the future, they will maximize their purchases now, so that means that the demand curve will shift to the right. They will want to buy more. Or vice versa, if they expect the price to fall, they're not going to buy now. Buy cheap, sell dear. So you're gonna wait until the price goes down. So the speculations about the changes in the price level, in the price of the commodity or product, can influence the price and demand at this moment. Okay, now finally, any questions? That's fine. Elasticity. Elasticity simply means, I'll give you the easy version of that first. When the price changes, people will buy the quantity demanded will change. Let's say if the price increases, quantity demanded will decrease. it's more expensive, people will buy less. Elasticity of demand is a measure of how much. How much the quantity demanded will change is a function of a given change in price. There's something, this is called the coefficient of elasticity. And it means, it's a simple equation, delta Q percentage-wise over delta P percentage-wise. So what is delta Q? Delta Q is a change in quantity demanded. This is demand curve. This is P1. This is Q1. Let's say that the price increased, P2. And quantity demanded dropped to Q2. So now what is delta Q? Delta Q is Q2 minus Q1. And delta P is P2 minus P1. But you don't get a coefficient of elasticity by dividing the raw numbers, by dividing this change as a percentage. So let's say that this was 15, this was $10, and this is 24, this is 32. So delta Q is 5 here, but as a percentage, what is the percentage change from 15 to 10? 33%, by a third. What is the percentage change here? 8 over 24, 8 over 32, yeah. So elasticity is a measure of how sensitive buyers are to the changes in price. If this elasticity is 1, we call that the unit elastic demand, which means you increase the price for 5%, by 5%, quantity demanded will decline by 5%. That's called the unit elasticity. In the same percentage in which you increase the price, quantity will drop. What's going to happen if this numerator here increases or decreases less than the price changes? Let's say that you increase price. Quantity will drop. If delta Q percentage-wise is lower than change in price, let's say you increase price by 50%, but you lose only 22% of sales. We call that relatively inelastic demand. Quantity doesn't stretch, doesn't change as much as a function of the change in price. So we can say that then coefficient of elasticity will be smaller than 1. If this number here is smaller than this one, then when you divide a larger number by smaller number, you will get a number smaller than 1. So that's relatively inelastic demand. That means that the quantity demanded changes less in percentage terms as a function of a given change in price. In both directions. When you increase the price, quantity demanded decreases less, and if you reduce the price, quantity demanded will increase less in percentage terms. And vice versa, if quantity changes quite a bit in percentage terms as a function of a given change in price, then elasticity coefficient will be greater than 1. And this is elastic demand curve. So why is this important? Can you tell me which demand curve will be more likely to describe a competitive market in which there is no monopoly? Which one? Elastic or inelastic? Elastic, why?
Because,
Yeah, they abandon you. Many of them abandon you. You change the price a little bit, they abandon you. They reduce their purchases. So see now connection between substitutes and elasticity. What determines elasticity is the availability of substitutes. People are more likely to abandon you if you increase price if they have other good alternatives available to them. If they don't, they may stick with you even if you charge very high prices. So monopolistic, let's say, monopolistic firm faces the vertical demand curve. That means this is the price one and quantity one, and then you increase price dramatically here. What happened to your quantity demanded? It's reduced far, far less. So vertical or relatively vertical demand curve describes a monopolistic situation in which people don't have good enough substitutes. And conversely, relatively horizontal demand curve describes a competitive market. This is price one, quantity one. You increase price a little bit, your quantity drops dramatically. Stronger the competition, more horizontal demand curve will be. And in some ideal type situation, people say the concept of perfect competition, in which you have thousands and millions of competitors, the demand curve will be completely horizontal. We'll analyze later on how that works for that model, but in general, more horizontal demand curve means that the quantity is more sensitive to the changes in prices, and producers have less of an ability to extract extra profits by charging higher prices to consumers, because consumers have better alternatives, better substitutes available. Okay, which factors influence whether the demand will be elastic or inelastic? What do you think? First one we already covered, substitutes. Second thing, time. Is it more likely that you're going to have a substitute in the short run or in the long run? If you already have a substitute available, all is well and good. But if you don't have it in the short run, there are incentives in the long run for them to be created. What are these incentives? There are other people who are motivated by profit opportunities. They know that there are a lot of dissatisfied, angry people who detest the fact that they're buying apple juice for very high prices. These people will be motivated to devise some alternative product that can satisfy the same need at a cheaper price. But this process of innovation and discovery takes time. So the demand curve for any given product is more likely to get more elastic with the passage of time. Longer the time period, less likely it is that you will have a vertical or inelastic demand curve. Because it's more likely that the substitutes are going to show up even if they didn't exist beforehand in the long run. So time. And finally, how important this group is. How large a percentage of your total expenditure is the expenditure of this particular group? If it's relatively low, then you would be willing to pay a little bit higher prices. So you wouldn't necessarily care too much if the cup of coffee is 30% more expensive. So the demand curve could be, you can charge a little bit more for a product that is less important, that consumes a lesser percentage of the total household budget. However, when we talk about cars or houses, or some capital purchases that consume a much larger percentage of your income, then the demand curve becomes much more elastic. People are much more reluctant to buy stuff that is more expensive. Because the total financial loss is great. So you see also the percentage of budget consumed by purchases of a good determine to some degree how elastic the demand for that good. Okay, so that's pretty much all I've got for today. Do you have any questions for me? No? Okay, so I will post tomorrow during the day the first homework for you. It will be multiple choice quiz covering just chapters 2 and 3. You have both of them on canvas, consult your notes, so there will be 8 or 9 questions that's testing basically. Okay, let's go today then. If you don't have any questions, see you on Tuesday. Have a nice weekend.